After my wife died, my sons received her penthouse, $17 million company, and a yacht. I was handed a small, crumpled envelope. Everyone laughed at me as I opened it. Inside was just a single plane ticket to Switzerland. When I arrived there, a driver held a sign with my name. When he said 3 words, my world collapsed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Stanley, and I'm 64 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew what love looked like after 30 years of marriage. I thought I understood my place in this family. I was wrong about everything. The mahogany conference table stretched before me like a judgment bench. Attorney Margaret Whitfield sat at the head, her silver hair pulled back severely. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose as she shuffled through the papers that would determine the rest of my life. To my left sat Marcus, Kristen's eldest son, 38 years old and already checking his Rolex. His wife Diana sat beside him, her manicured nails drumming impatiently against her designer purse. On my right, Thomas, the younger son at 35, leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk I'd grown to dread over the years. Before we begin, Margaret announced, her voice cutting through the tension, I want to remind everyone that Mrs. Kristen Hartwell Morrison's wishes were very specific and legally binding. I clasped my hands together to stop them from trembling. Kristen had been gone for exactly 17 days. 17 days since I held her hand in that sterile hospital room and watched the machines flatline. 17 days since I'd kissed her forehead one last time and whispered that I loved her. I hadn't even had time to properly grieve before the boys started talking about practical matters and settling the estate. Let's get this over with, Marcus muttered, not bothering to hide his impatience. Some of us have real jobs to get back to. Diana shot me a look that could freeze water. Yes, we all have lives to rebuild. The comment hit like a slap. Lives to rebuild. As if my 30-year marriage to their mother had been some kind of burden they'd all endured. As if Kristen and I hadn't built something beautiful together, something I thought would last forever. Margaret cleared her throat and began reading. To my beloved son Marcus, I leave the penthouse apartment on 5th Avenue, including all furnishings and artwork contained therein. Marcus straightened immediately, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. The penthouse. Good. Diana and I have been planning some renovations anyway. My stomach twisted. That penthouse. Kristen and I had looked at it together just 2 years ago. She'd mentioned it was for the future, but I'd assumed she meant for us to downsize there together someday. To my son Thomas, Margaret continued, I leave Morrison Industries, including all assets, subsidiaries, and holdings, valued at approximately $17 million. Thomas actually laughed out loud. $17 million. Not bad, Mom. Not bad at all. I felt the blood drain from my face. Morrison Industries, the company Kristen had built from nothing, the one she'd talked about leaving to the family. I'd helped her with the books for years, attended every important meeting, supported every major decision. Yet somehow I wasn't part of the family that would inherit it. Additionally, Margaret read on, Thomas will receive the yacht Kristen's Dream, currently moored in Martha's Vineyard. The yacht too? Diana clapped her hands together. Oh, this is wonderful news. I sat there in stunned silence. The yacht where Kristen and I had spent our honeymoon, where we'd celebrated every anniversary for the past 10 years, where she'd held my hand during her chemotherapy treatments and promised me we'd sail around the world together when she got better. Margaret's voice seemed to come from far away as she continued detailing smaller bequests. The beach house in Cape Cod to Marcus. The art collection to Thomas. The jewelry collection divided between the daughters-in-law. Each item felt like another piece of my life, with Kristen being carved away and handed to people who had barely tolerated my existence. Then Margaret paused. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. And finally, she said, her voice oddly gentle, to Stanley Morrison, my husband of 30 years, this was it. Whatever Kristen had left me, whatever token of our 3 decades together, whatever acknowledgement that I had mattered in her life. Margaret reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. The kind you might use for a birthday card. She slid it across the polished table toward me. This envelope, and its contents, as specified in the will. I stared at the envelope. It was sealed, with my name written in Kristen's familiar handwriting across the front. That was it. After 30 years of marriage, after helping her build a $17 million empire, after sitting by her bedside through 6 months of chemotherapy, after loving her with every fiber of my being, I got an envelope. Marcus burst out laughing first. An envelope? Seriously? That's it? Thomas joined in, slapping the table. Oh, this is rich. The gold digger gets an envelope. Gold digger? The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. Diana leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. Oh, please, Stanley. We all know what this was. You married our mother for her money, and now you're finding out what she really thought of you. That's not true, I whispered, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Isn't it? Marcus stood up, straightening his expensive suit. Face it, old man. Mom finally came to her senses. 30 years of pretending to care about you, and this is what you're worth to her. An envelope. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope. It felt light, almost empty. Whatever was inside couldn't weigh more than a few ounces. Go ahead, Thomas urged, grinning widely. Open it. Let's see what your loving wife thought you deserved. Margaret looked uncomfortable. Perhaps Mr. Morrison would prefer to open this privately. No, Diana interrupted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We're all family here. We should all see what Kristen's final gift to her devoted husband was. I fumbled with the envelope, my fingers clumsy with shock and humiliation. Inside was a single airline ticket. I pulled it out, squinting at the small print. A plane ticket? Marcus leaned over to look. Where to? Switzerland, I read aloud, my voice barely audible. One-way ticket to Zurich, departing tomorrow morning. The room erupted in laughter. Thomas was practically doubled over. She bought you a ticket out of the country. Oh my God, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Even in death, Mom had a sense of humor. Marcus wiped tears from his eyes. Here's your inheritance, Stanley. A one-way ticket as far away from us as possible. I stood up slowly, clutching the ticket in my trembling hand. Every pair of eyes in the room was on me, watching my humiliation with undisguised glee. These people who I'd considered family for 3 decades were laughing at my pain like it was the best entertainment they'd had in years. You know what this means, don't you? Diana's voice was sharp with victory. She wanted you gone. Out of our lives, out of our family, out of our country if necessary. Margaret gathered her papers, clearly eager to escape the toxic atmosphere. The will has been read and executed according to Mrs. Morrison's wishes. If there are no further questions. Just one, Thomas said, still grinning. Stanley, when's your flight? We'd hate for you to miss your send-off. I looked down at the ticket again. Tomorrow morning, 9:45 a.m., one way to Zurich, Switzerland, a country I'd never been to, where I knew no one, where I didn't even speak the language. As I walked toward the door, I heard Diana stage whisper to Marcus, 30 years of freeloading and all he gets is a plane ticket. Justice served. The last thing I heard before the door closed behind me was their laughter echoing through the conference room. I stood in the hallway of the law office holding my plane ticket, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my 64 years of life. Kristen was gone. The family I thought I belonged to had made it crystal clear I never belonged at all. And tomorrow morning I would board a plane to a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart shattered into pieces. What I didn't know was that this ticket would lead me to discover everything I thought I knew about my wife, my marriage, and my entire life had been carefully constructed lies designed to protect something far more valuable than I could have ever imagined. I spent that night in a hotel room 6 blocks from the house I'd called home for 30 years. The house where Kristen and I had planned to grow old together. The house that now belonged to Marcus, according to papers I'd discovered tucked in with the will. Even our home hadn't been left to me. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the plane ticket in my hands. Zurich, tomorrow at 9:45 in the morning. The numbers blurred through my tears as I tried to make sense of what my life had become in the span of a single afternoon. The phone on the nightstand rang twice during the evening. Both times it was Thomas. Just checking to make sure you're not going to miss your flight, he said during the second call, his voice thick with amusement. We'd hate for you to overstay your welcome. I hung up without responding. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kristen's face from our last conversation. She'd been weak from the chemotherapy, but her eyes were still bright when she took my hand and whispered, Stanley, I need you to promise me something. Anything, I'd said, meaning it with every cell in my body. Promise me you'll remember that I loved you. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, remember that I loved you more than my own life. At the time, I'd thought she was just being dramatic because of the medication. Now those words felt like they carried weight I hadn't understood. The taxi to the airport cost $37. I had $83 in my wallet and a debit card connected to a checking account with $942 in it. Not exactly the resources of a man planning to start over in a foreign country at 64 years old. The flight attendant who checked my ticket was a young woman with kind eyes who noticed my hands shaking. First time flying to Switzerland, she asked gently. First time flying alone, I admitted. The 8-hour flight stretched endlessly. I'd never been good with flying, and Kristen had always held my hand during takeoff and landing. Now I gripped the armrest and tried not to think about how alone I was, suspended 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean with no idea what waited for me on the other side. The man in the seat next to me tried to make conversation halfway through the flight. Business or pleasure? He asked, noting my obvious distress. I honestly don't know, I told him. He looked confused but didn't press further. As the plane began its descent into Zurich, I pressed my face to the window and watched the Swiss countryside unfold below us. Rolling green hills, pristine lakes, and mountains that looked like something from a postcard. It was beautiful, but it felt like I was seeing it through glass, separated from everything by grief and confusion. The Zurich airport was modern and efficient, with signs in multiple languages guiding travelers to their destinations. I followed the crowd toward customs, my single carry-on bag feeling pathetically light compared to the luggage carts loaded with suitcases around me. Purpose of your visit? The customs officer asked in accented English. I looked down at my crumpled one-way ticket. I honestly don't know. He stamped my passport with a look that suggested he'd heard stranger answers. As I emerged into the arrivals area, I scanned the crowd for what? I had no idea who I was looking for or if anyone was looking for me. The ticket had brought me here, but beyond that I was completely lost. That's when I saw him. That's a man in his 50s wearing a dark suit and holding a small placard with Stanley Morrison written in neat block letters. He was standing near the information desk, scanning the crowd with professional patience. My heart hammered as I approached him. "Excuse me, I'm Stanley Morrison." His face transformed immediately. Instead of the polite smile I expected, his expression became something close to reverence. "Mr. Morrison," he said in English with a slight German accent, "I have been waiting for you. My name is Klaus Weber. I am here to drive you." "Drive me where?" Klaus took my bag before I could protest. Mrs. Morrison arranged everything. "Please come with me." As we walked through the airport, I tried to process what was happening. "You knew my wife?" "Mrs. Morrison was very specific about your arrival. She made arrangements several weeks ago. While she was dying, while she was planning how to divide her estate among her sons, she had also been making arrangements for me in Switzerland." The contradiction made my head spin. Klaus led me to a black Mercedes sedan parked in a reserved space outside the terminal. The car was immaculate, expensive looking, not the kind of vehicle I'd ever ridden in before. "Klaus," I said as we pulled away from the airport, "can you tell me what this is about? Why am I here?" He met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Mrs. Morrison said you would have many questions. She said to tell you that all answers would come in time, but first you needed to rest." The Swiss countryside rolled by outside the windows. We drove through small villages with flower boxes on every windowsill, past churches with pointed spires and farms that looked like they hadn't changed in centuries. It was impossibly beautiful, but I felt like I was viewing it from another planet. "How far are we going?" I asked. "To Geneva, about 2.5 hours. Mrs. Morrison said you would need time to think during the journey." Time to think. I had nothing but time now, and every thought led me back to the same questions. Why Switzerland? Why had Kristen arranged this? And why had she made me believe I meant nothing to her when she was planning this elaborate journey while she was dying? We stopped for coffee at a small cafe in a village whose name I couldn't pronounce. Klaus bought me a sandwich and insisted I eat something. "Mrs. Morrison said you would forget to take care of yourself," he said matter-of-factly. "Even from beyond the grave, Kristen was taking care of me. But if she cared enough to arrange for food and transportation, why had she humiliated me so completely in front of her sons?" As we got back in the car, Klaus turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. "Mr. Morrison, may I say something?" I nodded. "Mrs. Morrison loved you very much. What happened yesterday with the reading of the will, it was necessary, but it was not the truth." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean?" Klaus started the engine and pulled back onto the road. "Mrs. Morrison said you would understand everything soon. She said to tell you 3 words when we arrived in Geneva." "What 3 words?" He met my eyes in the mirror again, and his expression was gentle, almost apologetic. "She protected you." Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned back in the leather seat, my mind racing. Protected me from what? From whom? And why did protection require making me believe I was worthless to her? As we drove through the Swiss countryside toward whatever waited for me in Geneva, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my wife, my marriage, and my life was about to change forever. The plane ticket hadn't been a cruel dismissal. It had been an invitation to discover the truth. But the truth about what? Geneva appeared before us as the sun began to set, the lake stretching like a mirror between the mountains. Klaus navigated through the city center with the confidence of someone who had made this journey many times before. We pulled up in front of a distinguished-looking building with brass plates beside the entrance, the kind of place that whispered money and discretion. "This is the office of Herr Friedrich Zimmermann," Klaus explained as he helped me from the car. "Mrs. Morrison's attorney here in Switzerland." My legs felt unsteady as we walked through the lobby. Everything was marble and mahogany, polished to perfection. A receptionist greeted Klaus by name and led us to an elevator that rose silently to the 7th floor. The office we entered was unlike any law office I'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Geneva, and the walls were lined with leather-bound books that looked older than I was. Behind an enormous desk sat a man who appeared to be in his 70s, with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Morrison," he said, rising and extending his hand. "I am Friedrich Zimmermann. Please sit down. We have much to discuss." Klaus quietly excused himself, leaving me alone with this stranger who somehow knew more about my situation than I did. "I must begin by expressing my condolences on the loss of your wife," Herr Zimmermann said, settling back into his chair. "Mrs. Morrison was a remarkable woman. She came to see me for the first time 22 years ago. 22 years ago? I couldn't hide my surprise. But we'd only been married 8 years then. Yes, she was very young, but very determined. She said she needed to make arrangements to protect the man she loved more than life itself." He opened a thick file on his desk. "That man was you, Mr. Morrison." I felt dizzy. I don't understand. Protect me from what? Herr Zimmerman leaned forward, his expression grave. From her sons, Mr. Morrison. She knew what kind of men they were becoming even then. She saw their greed, their entitlement, their complete lack of regard for anyone but themselves. The words hit me like cold water. But yesterday at the will reading she left me nothing, less than nothing. What you witnessed yesterday was theater, Mr. Morrison. Carefully orchestrated theater designed to achieve a very specific purpose. He pulled out a document and placed it before me. This is Mrs. Morrison's true will, the one that matters. I stared at the papers, unable to focus on the words. I don't understand. 22 years ago, your wife began transferring assets to Switzerland. Not all of her assets, but the ones that truly mattered. She created a series of trusts, investments, and holdings that her sons knew nothing about. Over the years, she built a substantial portfolio here, completely separate from Morrison Industries and her American holdings. My hands trembled as I tried to process this information. How substantial? Herr Zimmerman consulted another document. As of this morning, your wife's Swiss holdings are valued at approximately $43 million, all of it held in trust for you. The number didn't make sense. I repeated it aloud. $43 million? Mrs. Morrison was a very shrewd investor. What started as $2 million in initial transfers grew exponentially over 2 decades. She rarely touched the principal, allowing it to compound year after year. I slumped back in my chair, overwhelmed. But why the secrecy? Why make me believe I meant nothing to her? Because she knew her sons would contest any will that left you significant assets. She knew they would tie up the estate in legal battles for years, destroying both you and her legacy in the process. Herr Zimmerman's voice grew softer. She sacrificed her own reputation to protect you, Mr. Morrison. She allowed herself to appear heartless so that you could inherit what was rightfully yours. Tears blurred my vision. She let them humiliate me. She let me believe she didn't love me. She loved you enough to endure being seen as cruel. She loved you enough to let you hate her temporarily so that you could be free permanently. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Kristen's handwriting. She asked me to give you this after I explained the financial arrangements. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Kristen's words seemed to speak directly to my heart. My dearest Stanley, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have discovered the truth about our Swiss arrangements. I know you are angry with me. I know you feel betrayed and abandoned. I pray that someday you will understand why I chose to protect you this way. Marcus and Thomas are not good men, my love. I created them, I raised them, and I take full responsibility for what they became. But I could not let them destroy you the way they would have tried to destroy our marriage if they had known the truth about our finances. The $17 million I left them is real, but it comes with strings they don't yet understand. Morrison Industries is profitable, but it's also heavily leveraged. The penthouse has a mortgage. The yacht has liens against it. Within 6 months, they will discover that their inheritance comes with debts that will consume most of its value. I gave them what they wanted, the appearance of wealth and success, but I gave you what we built together, real security, real freedom, and the chance to live the rest of your life on your own terms. I know the plane ticket seemed cruel. I know being sent away felt like abandonment. But I needed you safe while they celebrated what they thought was their victory. I needed you to discover the truth here, in Switzerland, where they cannot touch you or what belongs to you. The money is yours, Stanley, but more importantly, your life is yours. You are free from them forever. You are free to travel, to explore, to find happiness without their constant judgment and manipulation. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you. I am so sorry I could not tell you the truth before I died. But I hope that someday, when the hurt fades, you will remember that every decision I made was because I loved you more than my own life. Forever yours, Kristen. I set the letter down and wept, not tears of grief this time, but tears of relief, confusion, and overwhelming love for a woman who had orchestrated the most elaborate act of protection I could have ever imagined. She planned this entire scenario? I asked when I could speak again. Every detail. The timing of the will reading, your flight arrangements, even Klaus picking you up at the airport. She spent months coordinating with my office to ensure your transition would be as smooth as possible. But her sons think they've won. For now. But Mrs. Morrison was very specific about something else. Herr Zimmerman pulled out another document. She instructed me to monitor their financial situation. When they inevitably come to realize that their inheritance is not what they believed it to be, they will likely attempt to contact you. What am I supposed to do then? Whatever you choose, Mr. Morrison, you hold all the power now. They have no legal claim to your Swiss assets. They cannot force you to return to America. They cannot manipulate or control you anymore. I looked out at Lake Geneva, where boats moved peacefully across the water in the fading light. Somewhere across the Atlantic, Marcus and Thomas were probably celebrating their windfall, completely unaware that their mother had outmaneuvered them so completely. She really did love me, I whispered. More than you may ever fully understand, Herr Zimmerman confirmed. The question now, Mr. Morrison, is what you want to do with the gift she has given you. As I sat in that office overlooking one of the most beautiful lakes in the world, holding the deed to a freedom I had never imagined possible, I realized that Kristen's final gift wasn't just the money. It was showing me that love sometimes requires sacrifice, that protection sometimes looks like cruelty, and that the deepest acts of devotion are often the ones that remain hidden until the moment they matter most. But there was something else in her letter, something that nagged at me. She had mentioned that Marcus and Thomas would discover debts that would consume their inheritance. How had she known that? And what exactly had she done to ensure their supposed victory would turn into something else entirely? Herr Zimmermann suggested I stay at a hotel near his office for the night, but I couldn't sleep. I walked the streets of Geneva until nearly dawn, Kristen's letter folded in my jacket pocket, trying to process everything I had learned. The city was peaceful at that hour, with only the occasional early commuter sharing the sidewalks with me. When I returned to Zimmermann's office the next morning, he was waiting with coffee and what looked like another thick file. "I did not tell you everything yesterday, Mr. Morrison," he said as I sat down. "Your wife left specific instructions that I was to reveal the complete truth. Only after you had time to absorb the initial revelation." I braced myself. What else? 3 months ago, Mrs. Morrison hired a private investigator in New York. She suspected her sons were planning something, and she wanted to know what. He opened the file and spread several photographs across his desk. What she discovered was disturbing. The photographs showed Marcus and Thomas meeting with various people, lawyers, accountants, and in one particularly damning image, a man I recognized as Dr. Harrison, the doctor who had been treating Kristen's cancer. "They were planning to have you declared mentally incompetent after Mrs. Morrison's death," Zimmermann explained. "The plan was to claim that grief had affected your judgment, that you were vulnerable to financial exploitation, and that you needed a conservatorship to protect you." My blood ran cold. A conservatorship? With Marcus as your legal guardian, they had already drafted the papers. Dr. Harrison was prepared to testify that your behavior during Mrs. Morrison's illness showed signs of diminished capacity. I stared at the photographs, feeling sick. But that's not true. I was perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Of course it wasn't true, but it didn't need to be true, Mr. Morrison. It only needed to be believable to a judge who didn't know you personally. They had witnesses prepared to testify about your erratic behavior during your wife's illness. Another photograph showed Diana meeting with a woman I didn't recognize outside what appeared to be a nursing facility. They had already selected a care facility where you would be placed, a very expensive facility, coincidentally, which would have required them to manage your finances on your behalf. The full scope of their plan was becoming clear, and it was terrifying. They were going to steal everything. Not steal exactly, manage. They would have been your legal guardians, responsible for your care and your finances. Any inheritance you might have received would have been theirs to control, ostensibly for your own good. I thought about the way they had treated me at the will reading, the barely concealed contempt, the jokes about sending me away. It hadn't been casual cruelty. It had been the groundwork for their larger plan. How did Kristen find out about this? She became suspicious when Dr. Harrison began asking unusual questions about your mental state during her appointments. When she pressed him, he inadvertently revealed that he had been contacted by your stepsons about your concerning behavior. Zimmermann pulled out another document. "This is when Mrs. Morrison contacted me about accelerating our timeline. She had originally planned to reveal the Swiss accounts to you after her death through a more gradual process. But once she learned about their plans, she knew she had to act more decisively. The plane ticket, I realized, getting me out of the country immediately." Exactly. If you had remained in New York after the will reading, they would have moved quickly to implement their conservatorship plan. By sending you here, she removed you from their jurisdiction and their reach. But there was something else in the file that caught my attention. A thick stack of financial documents with Marcus and Thomas's names on them. "What are those?" Zimmermann's expression grew grim. "This is perhaps the most brilliant aspect of your wife's plan. She didn't just protect you, Mr. Morrison. She ensured that her sons would face consequences for their greed." He spread the documents before me. 2 years ago, Mrs. Morrison quietly restructured Morrison Industries. On paper, the company appears to be worth $17 million, just as stated in the will, but the reality is more complex. I studied the papers, trying to make sense of the financial details. "What do you mean?" "The company owns $17 million in assets, yes, but it also carries $16.7 million in debt. Debt that was carefully hidden in subsidiary companies and offshore accounts. The net value of Morrison Industries is approximately $300,000. My mouth fell open. $300,000 $800,000 and falling. The debt service alone cost nearly $40,000 per month without Mrs. Morrison's personal guarantees backing the loans which died with her. The creditors will begin calling in their notes within 60 days. The magnitude of what Kristen had done was staggering. She let them inherit a company that's essentially bankrupt? Not bankrupt, but certainly not the gold mine they believe it to be. The penthouse apartment has a mortgage of $2.1 million against its $2.4 million value. The yacht has liens totaling $800,000 against its $1 million value. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed. So their $17 million inheritance is actually approximately $1.2 million in net assets, but with ongoing obligations that will consume most of that within the first year. Unless they make some very smart financial decisions very quickly, they will find themselves in serious trouble. Did she plan this as revenge? Zimmerman shook his head. I don't believe so. I think she planned it as justice. They wanted her money without any responsibility or effort. She gave them exactly what they asked for, ownership of her assets, but ownership comes with responsibilities they never considered. He handed me another envelope. She left you another letter, to be opened only after you learned about their conservatorship plan. I opened it with trembling hands. Stanley, if you are reading this, then you now know the full extent of what Marcus and Thomas planned to do to you. I am so sorry that my children became the kind of people who would steal from a grieving widower. I am sorry that I failed as a mother to teach them basic human decency. But I am not sorry for what I did to protect you. They wanted to take everything from you and lock you away like some inconvenient problem to be managed. Instead, they will discover that taking everything comes with a price they never anticipated. I could have left them nothing, but that would have created different problems. This way they get exactly what they wanted, my business empire. They just get it complete with all the responsibilities I carried, responsibilities they never bothered to understand or appreciate. You, my love, are free. You have the resources to live however you choose, wherever you choose. You never have to see them again if you don't want to, but if you do choose to return to America someday, it will be as a man of independent means, not as their victim. They will eventually realize what has happened. They may try to contact you, to blame you, to demand that you help them, but you owe them nothing. Remember that. You owe them absolutely nothing. Live well, Stanley. Live freely. Live without fear or obligation to people who never deserved your kindness in the first place. All my love, Kristen. I set the letter down and looked out at Lake Geneva again. Somewhere across the ocean, Marcus and Thomas were probably already making plans for their new wealth, completely unaware that they had inherited a financial time bomb. When will they figure it out? I asked. The first loan payments will come due in approximately 6 weeks. The mortgage on the penthouse is due for renewal in 3 months, and without Mrs. Morrison's personal guarantee, the bank will require new collateral or immediate payment. And then they will discover that owning a business empire is very different from inheriting a windfall. They will have to work, Mr. Morrison. They will have to make sacrifices. They will have to learn responsibility, or they will lose everything. As I sat in that office, holding the documents that proved my freedom and their eventual reckoning, I realized that Kristen had given me something more valuable than money. She had given me justice without requiring me to seek revenge. She had protected me completely while teaching her sons the hardest lesson of their lives. But I also realized that this story was far from over. When Marcus and Thomas discovered the truth about their inheritance, they would come looking for someone to blame. And despite being an ocean away, I had a feeling that someone would be me. I spent 6 weeks in Switzerland, staying at a small hotel overlooking Lake Geneva, while Herr Zimmerman helped me understand the full scope of my new financial situation. During those weeks, I felt like I was learning to breathe again. For the first time in 30 years, I woke up each morning without the weight of Marcus and Thomas's disapproval hanging over me, but I also knew this peaceful interlude wouldn't last forever. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was having breakfast at a cafe near the lake when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Stanley. The voice was Diana's, but it sounded different, strained, desperate. How did you get this number? I asked. We hired someone to find you. Stanley, we need to talk. Something's happened. I took a sip of my coffee, maintaining my calm. What kind of something? It's about Mom's estate. There are complications. Can you come home? We need your help. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 weeks ago, they'd laughed me out of the lawyer's office. Now they needed my help. I'm not sure I can help you with anything, Diana. Please. Her voice cracked. Marcus is. He's not handling this well. We're in serious trouble. I could hear shouting in the background, and then Marcus's voice came on the line. Stanley, get back here now. There's been some kind of mistake with the estate. The company is drowning in debt, and the lawyers are saying Mom somehow hid liabilities from us. That sounds like a problem for you and Thomas to solve. Don't play games with me, old man. We know you know something. Mom wouldn't have sent you away unless she was hiding something. The accusation in his voice was exactly what Kristen had predicted. They couldn't accept that their inheritance came with responsibilities, so they needed someone else to blame. I'm sorry you're having difficulties, I said evenly, but I don't see how I can help. Because you were married to her for 30 years, Marcus exploded. You had to know about the company's finances. You had to know she was setting us up, setting them up, as if giving them exactly what they'd always demanded was somehow a betrayal. I think this conversation is over, I said. Stanley, wait. This was Thomas now, his voice more controlled than his brother's. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot at the will reading. Emotions were high, we all said things we didn't mean. But we're family, and family helps each other. Family. Now they wanted to claim me as family. I'll think about it, I lied, and hung up. But I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. Herr Zimmermann had warned me that this moment would come, and he'd helped me prepare for it. 2 days later, Klaus picked me up at my hotel with news that didn't surprise me. They are here, Mr. Morrison, in Geneva. They have been asking questions at hotels, showing your photograph. I'd been expecting this. Desperate people do desperate things, and Marcus and Thomas were nothing, if not desperate. Are they staying in the city? At the Beau Rivage. They arrived this morning and have already contacted 3 different law firms, asking about Swiss inheritance law. I almost smiled. They were trying to find a way to challenge Kristen's Swiss arrangements, not knowing that she'd spent 22 years making those arrangements completely bulletproof. What would you like me to do? Klaus asked. Take me to Herr Zimmermann's office. I think it's time to have a conversation with my stepsons. An hour later, I was sitting in Zimmermann's office when his secretary announced that 2 American gentlemen were requesting an urgent meeting with me. Send them in, I said. Marcus and Thomas entered the office looking like men who hadn't slept in days. Marcus's usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. Thomas looked pale and drawn. Diana followed behind them, her designer handbag clutched tightly in both hands. Stanley, Marcus began, attempting his old commanding tone, but it came out weak. We need to talk. So talk. They sat down across from me, the power dynamic completely reversed from our last meeting. Now I was the one behind the large desk in the impressive office, and they were the supplicants. The company is in trouble, Thomas said bluntly. Serious trouble. There are debts we didn't know about, loans that are coming due, creditors calling every day. I'm sorry to hear that. You're sorry? Marcus leaned forward aggressively. You had to know about this. You worked with Mom on the books for years. I helped your mother with some basic bookkeeping, I corrected. I was never involved in major financial decisions. That's impossible, Diana interjected. You were married to her. Spouses know these things. Herr Zimmermann, who had been quietly observing from his chair, finally spoke. Perhaps I can clarify the situation. Mr. Morrison had no knowledge of Mrs. Morrison's business debts because those debts were restructured without his involvement during the final 2 years of her life. Marcus's eyes narrowed. And who are you? Friedrich Zimmermann, Mrs. Morrison's Swiss attorney. The 3 of them exchanged glances. Swiss attorney? Thomas repeated. What did she need a Swiss attorney for? Perhaps, Zimmermann suggested, we should discuss this matter more directly. Mrs. Morrison anticipated this conversation might become necessary. He pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk. Mrs. Morrison left specific instructions for what should happen if her sons came to Switzerland looking for additional assets. Additional assets? Diana's voice was sharp with hope. There are additional assets. There are assets in Switzerland, yes, but they do not belong to you. Marcus stood up quickly. What do you mean they don't belong to us? Everything Mom owned belongs to us now. Everything Mrs. Morrison owned in the United States belongs to you, subject to the debts and obligations attached to those assets, Zimmermann corrected. Her Swiss holdings are separate and were never part of her American estate. Swiss holdings? Thomas was trying to keep his voice level, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. What kind of Swiss holdings? Zimmermann looked at me and I nodded. It was time for the truth. Your stepfather is the sole beneficiary of Mrs. Morrison's Swiss estate, valued at approximately $43 million. The silence in the room was absolute. Diana's handbag slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. $43 million? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. That's impossible, Thomas said, shaking his head. That's impossible. Stanley got nothing. We saw the will. You saw the American will, Zimmermann corrected, which dealt only with Mrs. Morrison's American assets. Her Swiss assets were held in trust for Mr. Morrison and were never subject to American probate law. Marcus turned to stare at me, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear. You knew, he accused. You knew all along. I found out 6 weeks ago when I arrived in Switzerland. The plane ticket, Diana breathed. The plane ticket wasn't a dismissal. It was an invitation. Your stepmother wanted to ensure that Mr. Morrison could claim his inheritance without interference, Zimmerman explained. Thomas was doing calculations in his head. $43 million. Stanley, that's enough to solve all our problems. The company debts, the mortgages, everything. You have to help us. I looked at these 3 people who had spent years treating me like an inconvenience, who had laughed at my humiliation, who had planned to have me declared incompetent so they could steal whatever inheritance I might have received. Why would I do that? Because we're family, Diana said desperately. Because that's what family does for each other. Family, I repeated. Like when you planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could put me in a nursing home and control my finances. The color drained from Marcus's face. How did you know about that? Your mother hired investigators. She knew exactly what you were planning. Thomas slumped in his chair. She set us up. She gave us a poisoned inheritance and sent you away with the real money. She gave you exactly what you always wanted, I corrected. Control of her business empire. She just gave it to you complete with all the responsibilities she carried. Responsibilities you never bothered to understand. Marcus was on his feet again, pacing. This is insane. There has to be a way to contest this. We're her biological children. Stanley's just some old man she married. Some old man she loved enough to protect from you, I said quietly. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. For 30 years I'd tried to earn their acceptance, their respect, their acknowledgement that I belonged in their family. Now I realized I'd never needed their acceptance at all. Stanley, Thomas tried one more time, his voice pleading. We made mistakes. We treated you badly, but we can change. We can be a real family now. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Lake Geneva. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere out there, boats were returning to harbor, their passengers heading home to people who loved them. Thomas, I said without turning around. You've had 30 years to treat me like family. You chose not to. I'm not interested in changing that relationship now. When I turned back to face them, all 3 were staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. Not contempt or dismissal, but something much more uncomfortable for them to experience. Respect, born of fear. For the first time in 30 years, I held all the power in our relationship. And for the first time in my life, I was going to use it on my own terms. That evening, I sat alone in my hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, thinking about the conversation in Zimmerman's office. Marcus, Thomas, and Diana had left Switzerland that same night, their faces bearing the weight of a reality they hadn't expected to face. But something in their desperation had stirred an unexpected emotion in me. Not pity exactly, but something close to it. The next morning, I called Herr Zimmerman. I want to make them an offer, I told him. Mr. Morrison, you are under no obligation to help them. I know. But Kristen was still their mother, and despite everything they've done, she loved them. I think there's something she would want me to do. Zimmerman was quiet for a moment. What did you have in mind? I want to pay off their debts, all of them. The company loans, the mortgages, everything. But I want it done in a way that teaches them something about responsibility. That will cost you approximately $16 million. I can afford it, but I don't want them to know it came from me. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Klaus drove me to the airport for my return flight to New York. But this time I wasn't flying as a broken man with nothing but a mysterious plane ticket. I was returning as someone who had learned the difference between charity and enabling, between family and people who happened to share your name. The flight back to America gave me 12 hours to think about what I wanted my life to look like. At 64, I was starting over, but starting over with resources and wisdom I'd never had before. When I landed at JFK, no one was waiting for me. I hadn't told anyone I was coming back. Instead, I took a taxi to a hotel in Manhattan and began the process of quietly rebuilding my life. The first thing I did was buy a small house in Connecticut. Nothing fancy, but with a garden where I could grow vegetables like Kristen, and I had always talked about doing someday. The second thing I did was visit the cemetery where Kristen was buried. Her headstone was simple, elegant, exactly what she would have chosen. I sat beside her grave for a long time, telling her about Switzerland, about the Swiss accounts, about her son's reaction to learning the truth. You were right about everything, I told her. They came looking for me as soon as they realized they were in trouble. But you were also right about something else. I didn't need their approval. I never did. A week later, I received a call from Thomas. Stanley, I don't know how to say this, but something incredible happened. An anonymous benefactor paid off all our debts. All of them. The lawyers won't tell us who, but the company is free and clear. I listened to the wonder in his voice, the relief, the gratitude directed at a stranger who had saved his family from financial ruin. That's wonderful news, Thomas. Stanley, I know we treated you terribly. I know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that we're different now. Having to face losing everything, having to work 18-hour days just to keep the lights on, it changed us. We understand now what Mom went through to build what she built. I'm glad to hear that. There's something else. We want to do right by you. We know the inheritance wasn't fair. We want to share what we have. This was the moment Kristen had been preparing for, though she probably hadn't realized it. Her sons, humbled by near bankruptcy and saved by anonymous kindness, were finally becoming the men she'd always hoped they could be. Thomas, I said carefully, I appreciate the offer, but I'm doing fine on my own. Are you sure? Because we have more than enough now. And it doesn't feel right that you should have nothing while we have everything. For the first time in 30 years, one of Kristen's sons was offering to share with me, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The irony was that I no longer needed what he was offering. I'm sure, but Thomas, I'm proud of you for offering. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation. Marcus was getting remarried. His new fiancée was a kindergarten teacher he'd met while volunteering at a children's hospital. The invitation included a handwritten note. Stanley, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider walking me down the aisle? Diana and I are divorced, and I realize that of all the people in my life, you're the one who knew Mom best. You're the one who loved her the way she deserved to be loved. I'd be honored if you'd stand with me. I stared at the invitation for a long time. This was the same man who had laughed at my humiliation, who had planned to have me declared incompetent, who had treated me like an intruder in his family for 3 decades. But it was also a man who had learned humility the hard way, who had discovered that wealth without character is worthless, who was trying to build something better from the ashes of his old life. I called him that evening. Marcus, I'll be there. The wedding was small, held in a garden behind the house Marcus had bought with money earned from the company he now truly understood how to run. As I walked him down the aisle, I thought about Kristen and how proud she would have been to see her son taking responsibility for his life, choosing love over convenience, building something real instead of just inheriting something built by someone else. At the reception, Thomas stood up to make a toast. 2 years ago, I thought I knew what family meant, he said, looking directly at me. I thought it was about blood, about inheritance, about who owed what to whom. But I learned something from someone who had every reason to hate us, but chose to teach us about grace instead. He raised his glasses to Stanley Morrison, who showed us that being a father isn't about biology. It's about showing up day after day, year after year, loving people even when they don't deserve it. You were the father we never appreciated until we grew up enough to understand what fatherhood really means. The room was quiet as people raised their glasses. I felt tears on my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of completion, of a family finally becoming what it was always meant to be. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Marcus found me sitting alone on a bench in the garden. Stanley, can I ask you something? Of course. The anonymous benefactor who paid off our debts. That was you, wasn't it? I met his eyes. What makes you think that? Because it's exactly what Mom would have done, and because you learned everything about love and forgiveness from her. I didn't confirm or deny it. Some gifts are meant to remain anonymous. Marcus, your mother loved you and Thomas more than her own life. Everything she did, even the things that seemed cruel, was because she wanted you to become the men you were capable of being. We wasted so many years being angry at the wrong people. You weren't ready to be the right kind of people yet. Sometimes we have to lose everything to appreciate what we actually have. As I drove home that night, I realized that Kristen's final gift hadn't just been the Swiss accounts or the protection from her son's schemes. Her final gift had been showing me that love doesn't require approval, that family isn't defined by blood or legal documents, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting people fall far enough to learn how to stand on their own. I live quietly now, in my small house with my garden. I travel when I want to, help people who need help, and sleep peacefully knowing that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Marcus and Thomas call me regularly, not because they need anything, but because they want to maintain the relationship we finally learned how to build. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when I'm working in my garden, I talk to Kristen. I tell her about her son's successes, about their families, about the men they've become. I tell her that her plan worked perfectly, that protection sometimes does look like abandonment, and that the deepest love sometimes requires the courage to appear unloving. Most of all, I tell her that I finally understand what she meant when she said she loved me more than her own life. She gave up being seen as a loving mother so that I could be free to become the father her sons actually needed. That plane ticket to Switzerland wasn't just transportation to a new country, it was passage to a new life, one where love is measured not by what we receive but by what we're willing to sacrifice for the people who matter most. And in the end, that's the only inheritance that truly matters.